It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets, Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelley, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor. Whether you're new to genealogy or a seasoned veteran, it never hurts to head back to the basics. Episode 93, which is tonight, will cover how to maximize your efforts, as well as help you gather more and more information in your family history search. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's episode, episode 93 of BlackProGen Live, entitled You've Got Started How? Revisiting Your Research Process. If you have a question or comment, be sure to join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat taking place on YouTube to the top right of the screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, feel free to weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or use the hashtag BlackProGen. Also, don't forget, we're active on social media when the show is not taking place. So if you see some news, want to tag us into a comment, that happens quite often, whatever it is, please be sure to reach out to us through our social channels. If you've ever missed an episode live and you've always wanted to watch one so you can participate in the chat or maybe ask a question of the panel or maybe one of our special guests, here is your reminder to set reminders. All you need to do is head to the YouTube channel for BlackProGen Live and click subscribe. And then you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live and anytime I upload something new to the channel. Also, you can go into the episodes that you're interested in under the upcoming live streams area on the YouTube channel and click set reminder on the episodes that you're interested in. Now, be mindful, if you are using Gmail, some of those reminders may go to your promotions folder. So be sure to check that out and maybe slide them over or, move them to your main folder. So then that way, when you get the notifications about BlackProGen Live or anything I post, you will see them immediately. If you are like us and you are tired of seeing Confederate flag ships, flowers, and all the wrong oil paintings as profile images for your ancestors, BlackProGen Live is here to save the day. Download our new icons for online tree profiles. We're adding new ones all the time, so if we miss something, be sure to let us know. All right. Your illustrious panel is here to save the day, genealogically speaking. It's your host, Nika Smith, here, along with the panel of esteemed guests. Everyone, please feel free to come off mute. We're going to talk the basics of genealogy tonight, which, if you can believe it, this is the first time we've ever done a beginner show in almost 100 episodes. So please forgive our negligence of not of not covering beginners. So let's see, who am I going to talk to first? You know what? Let's talk to Willie because he has not been on in an extended period of time. Hello, Willie.
Hello. It's glad to be back.
All right, all right. How is school going?
School's going great.
Good, good.
Almost are we done? Almost done.
Are we? And we're still on. We're still on to graduate.
Yes, but next it'll be a little longer, but we're still on schedule to graduate.
Okay, so 2020 is our year, panel. What does that mean? That means we might need to show up in force in New Orleans to support one of our young people at his graduation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, and I will also say it may be, because your graduation is probably going to be at the beginning of the month, right?
Well, actually, I'm going to graduate in December of 2020. So
that's what I'm saying. So your graduation is going to be at the beginning of the month or the end of the month. The reason why I'm asking is because this might be enticing to some of the panelists to spend Christmas in New Orleans.
Well,
They
actually,
got a casino down there.
They do have a casino down
I
there.
know.
We're still gonna be in Heckler's Row regardless.
Yes, we are. Drop me off.
One. Yeah.
Oh my
Hey,
gosh, drop
hey,
me
for
off.
Willie.
And Willie, and so what is your degree going to be in?
I will have a BA in history with a minor in African American studies.
Cool.
Ooh.
Well done.
My
Look,
baby.
I know. I have such an attachment to Willie. Okay, our second college student who is here in the red shirt, who is in sunny California. He's on another coast. Our other resident baby, who's not a baby, but is a baby for us. Alex Traps Chabala, how are you?
Hello, you guys. The rest of my house is pretty dark, so I got the sun beaming on me, as y'all can see. I am doing really, really good, really good. Today is a brilliant day. I'm happy to be on the show.
All right. Checking in from Newport News, Virginia, with her lovely silver goldest necklace on, is Renata Yarborough Sanders, our newly minted, the person with the newest hips on the panel, and recent visitor to a football game, despite having a hip replaced, okay? Because a lot of people would have stayed at home and not tried to venture out, but she pushed herself. Yes, we got to give her a hand for pushing herself, right? Because some people get lazy and they don't want to do the physical therapy and they want to stay in bed and they want to lay up, but you know, I'm sure that you have to maintain activity in order for you to get up and out, which you were doing.
Yeah, so I did that for the first couple of weeks, which wasn't that good, but my daughter was here taking care of me, and I haven't been taken care of in a very long time, so I had to go for that. But yes, I did go to the UVA ODU game on Saturday after giving 2 presentations in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I made it through all of that and did very well, and I'm feeling just great and glad to be here on the show
Awesome.
tonight.
Awesome.
Yay. And our other Virginiaite in the house, all super silky tonight. Okay, she came in silky McSilky on tonight's episode. Freshly chopped hair, right?
Chopped.
Our resident auntie, one of the resident aunties, Dr. Shelley Murphy.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here in the good old state of Virginia.
All right. She is here. Last but not least, well, actually, there's a couple last but not leasts,
Yes.
because we have to jump to the great state of Florida right now to our
Yeah.
other resident auntie. That would be Thea, if we're being correct.
Hola.
Thea Ellen. Yay! How are you, Ellen? How's everything going down there in good old Florida?
It's good. It's doing good down here. It's been warm and no rain and no hurricane, and so far so good.
All right.
So far
And
so good. Getting used to these new eyes.
Okay, so we not only have a new hip on the panel tonight, but we've got new eyes too.
Yeah.
Looking good
just had
too.
eye surgery.
Yeah.
Yes. So you guys don't think you can run from Renata and don't think you can outsee Ellen.
I love it.
Oh my gosh. And True Am girl, what's going on over there in Fort Knox?
Girl, everything is fine here. I'm just as happy as a bumblebee. I get to go home this weekend. I haven't been to Harrisburg in a minute, but I'm about to throw down on my Middleworth chips and Turkey Hill iced tea and tasty cakes. But I'm glad to be here and see everybody. I don't know why it seems like we just haven't been on for a while when I know we just was here last week.
We were, and you know what, that goes further to say, you all don't forget, you are going to be seeing us consecutively for the next
To the end
5
of the year.
weeks.
Yeah.
I have to go like this.
Yes, until the end of the year. No lie, you guys, we are not pulling your leg. We literally are going to be with you weekly until the show.
My hair is gray.
Until the show,
I got you beat, girl.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh my
Real.
gosh. So yes, and Carmen says, "Come on with the curls." You see, she got her kitchen curls, and Shelly went straight. She just went straight, right?
I mean, really kitchen curls. Like she washed and just sat me under the dryer.
Oh, but
cute.
she didn't even do the iron. She just put you in a
No, she just put them old curlers in with them little iron clips and stacked me under the dryer. I didn't even pull them apart.
Oh, girl, so that means you gotta see, if you don't know anything about hair, that means she still got another maybe 3 or 4 days worth of curl wearing.
Yes.
They fall down.
Yes, as they fall down. Oh, yes.
No, they fall out.
I hope not.
Fall
I'm
out.
trying to sleep like this.
Put the rag on your head. Wrap it up.
Well,
Tie your hair up. You already know, True. You already know it's how you have to do it. All right, so let's get into the content for the evening. Okay, we've spent almost 100 episodes of BlackProGen Live focusing on intermediate to advanced genealogy research, right? But we would be remiss if we didn't get to 100 episodes and we didn't take a step back, right? Which is something everyone, every single person watching this, even those who consider themselves seasoned, who maybe present to folks, who maybe take on clients, everyone, regardless of where you are in your station in terms of genealogy, needs to take a step back from time to time on their own research projects, right? So let's talk about how one should truly begin the process of tracing their family history. Because I think in some ways, this has been kind of, I don't know. It's been, the process has been sort of switched, right? Because of the online, of just the online environment, right? Like, we'll go through all the stops. But I think people, because stuff starts online, it kind of derails folks faster than it would be if folks did not start online. So let's talk appropriate steps. Here I am. I want to know about my family. What am I supposed to do?
Find your oldest relative that you can and start with them. Just ask questions.
Okay, but what kind of questions? Am I going to Aunt May Sue and I'm saying, Aunt May Sue, where did you grow up?
I would start off with what's her parents' names.
Okay.
Start off with names and then go into location of where they're from and birth dates, if she can remember birth dates. Those type of questions that I would ask first.
Well, would you ask Aunt May Sue this just because she's the oldest, or should you go to your parents or grandparents? There's no right or wrong answer.
I always encourage.
Go ahead.
I always encourage people to start off with what they know themselves first, and write it all down, what you know yourself, and then work your way outward. Whoever you have around you, if that's parents, aunts, uncles. But you do want to get to those older family members without delay, because you have no guarantees. You really have no guarantees that anybody's going to be around the next day. But you do want to get to those older family members as soon as you can. But to start off, just write down what you already know so that you can see where your gaps are.
Well, and that's the thing, though, for some young people, they may not know anything, right? Which
I knew nothing.
Like me.
Yeah.
I knew nothing when I started.
Willie, did you know anything when you started?
No, that actually I didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't. I really didn't. I only knew my grandparents' names, and that's it. I did not know their parents' names. That was it.
But what would you do in a situation if you only had one grandparent?
I only had one. I only had one. My grandfather, my dad's dad. That's the only one I have. So I asked him about his side and also asked about my grandmother's side as much as he knew. And with my mom, actually my grandmother was still living when I started researching, my mom's mom. So I would ask her questions also for both grandparents, so my grandfather and her. So that's how I worked my way.
Well, and something that's interesting that I found, at least in my family, is that my mom remembered a lot of details about my father's family that I didn't realize. Like, I guess, it pays to have a nosy spouse of a person, because my mom remembered a lot of things that just small things that have like helped me in my research. So, all right. So if we're starting, we need to go to ask someone questions, whether it's ourselves or whether it's our parents or whether it's Aunt May Sue, right? Or someone who has poised themselves in your family as being the genealogical expert, right? Or someone, when everyone gets together at family gatherings, is the one that's saying, this glass, that jar belonged to my great grandmother, and she used to store buttons in here, and she used to sew. You know, it's someone that tells those stories, right? Start with that. Now, notice we did not say. Did we say go online and search for these people first?
No, absolutely not.
No.
So why? I mean, because all I have to do is hold my arm out and the tree comes popping out of my arm and going back to Africa with the ship, right? Like all I have to do is that I just put the name in and the tree is already built, DNA results already processed, right? Someone's gonna come with a book of life with all of my information already done. Like why don't I go and search online first? Because that starts that whole arm reveal process. Why would I not start online first?
Well, you're not going to get those stories online, number one. Number two, you're not going to get the information that the family knows online either. So I never started off with documents. I actually started with my mother, but it was about everything. I was helping her. And then it got to the point that I had to do what Renata said and just basically, what do I know? You know, and never realized till like 20 some years later that I was always, every summer we were on homestead property. Never knew that. It never hit me, you know, to think, oh, wait a minute. I understand that now, say 30 years later. But in the beginning, there was no computer. It was writing letters and making telephone calls and going places. So one of the things I would say is not to start online at all unless you're going to print out you a chart or something that you can fill in. I would start with mama or grandma or aunties, whoever, you know, to get what I know. And then I'm just going to start asking questions to everybody. The computer will come in later. I got to find a cemetery too, because I know everybody before me basically is gone. So is there a family cemetery? But a lot of people won't even know to ask that, you know, if they're brand new. So again, it's going to have to be right at home, starting at home and staying in that local community.
And then also, if you go online too, you can find false information. So that can even confuse you even more.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. That's what I was going to say something about, because if you speak to your family members and parents, grandparents, whatever, you're going to get some names. And so then when you do go online, you're looking for names that match what they have told you. Now you may find additional names, but you know, you're going to always find people who have the same names as your ancestors. So in order to verify that you have the right family, you need to have what your parents, grandparents, or whoever, aunts, uncles have told you in there somewhere.
I'm going to chime in after that. Also, one of the things that of course we have to do is we have to start with who we are. What do we think we are? What's our identity? What community do we belong to? And what community did our ancestry belong to? So that's great and all. But for a lot of us, when we were starting this research, most of the information that can get someone started wasn't actually online at the time. And for a lot of us, if we come from you know, traditional families or traditional family units, then, you know, like some of this information may be accessible, but as far as like asking living people, but say for instance, someone who's not raised by their parents, or someone who in the genealogy community, we call non-paternal events or non-maternal events, what do you do then? So I think that we also have to walk a thin line with saying, you know, not to start online, because sometimes somebody can be in a displaced community where they don't have access to records, to archives and repositories, or to word of mouth. On the other side of that, there's the danger, as Nika was saying earlier, about that extended arm and the tree is already there. You know, what if we haven't taken a DNA test? What if we go on this internet and we say, okay, I'm looking at John Smith, born in Vallejo, California, December 19th, 19, you know, whatever. That's my daddy. Well, guess what? Johnny may not be your daddy. So how do we factor that into our research process if we're just going online? We have to find community that talks to and that knows a little something. And usually usually there will be something there. So I don't think that all of us, I mean, we're on a web show, so we know the value of the internet. We know the value of everyday new repositories of information coming online. However, we also can look at the dangers of that as well and look at how to navigate that.
I think just to add to what Alex was saying was like not to get too hung up, to think about an expansive definition of family. Like if your family doesn't look like a traditional family unit, that's okay. You know, if you're going to record the information, you record the information. If those people are your parents, or they're like, that's the function, that's how it can be on your tree. But you don't have to worry that, oh my gosh, you know, it's not what the document says. But if you're writing in your family history, you can build all of that in. You know, it doesn't have to be that it's it has to show up like it's precisely to some specific rule or some ideal of what family is, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you guys are raising important points. Something that I noticed in working with youth who were new to genealogy, right? These are people who, young folks, right? Who have living grandparents, or they may be raised by the grandparents, right? The whole idea of even paying attention to the way that forms are put together, right? Never, as a genealogical community, we have to be sure, right? It's just as we're preparing, folks for being mindful about different types of relationships, right? Whether they be LGBTQI or maybe interracial, whatever, we also have to be prepared for when you give a form to somebody and it says husband and wife on there, that may not be the situation that these folks were born into, maybe in that generation or maybe even later, right? So, and we also, need to be mindful of the fact that, right, we instead of just back in the day, we had to be worried about adoption, but we have to be also concerned about people who were conceived through donors and other things like that, how we address those things. So everyone's journey may not start off the exact same way, but we've got to keep in perspective what, just the different nuances of the genealogical experience. So now that we've established that you either start with yourself, start with an elder, start with someone who knows something, or maybe you're going online to see what's already out there if you are displaced from your family, either due to location or maybe relationships, right? Because we have to remember that some of this is psychology. If your mother stopped speaking to her sister 25 years ago and you don't know why, and you don't have any context for, you know what I mean? Like who your family is, there is no elder to reach out to, right? So there, that would be cause for more of a reason to go online first, right? So you're documenting these things. I always suggest with starting with yourself and writing things down. I'm an advocate of this. You guys have to let me know what you think about it. But the reason why is because I need it in front of my face, right? And sometimes based on how you view a tree, you can't see everything at a glance at one time, right? It could just be very compartmentalized by family. And if your family grew up in a location or established themselves in a location where several people, like from one line lived in one city and they have similar names, like you have two Uncle Edwards and two Uncle Johns or two Uncle Juans or whoever, right? You can get confused on which side of the family you're looking at. So that's another reason why I suggest to people to write it out and start with the pedigree chart in front of you, right? And for those of us who are seasoned, I suggest you print out a blank pedigree chart and fill it out based on memory.
Okay.
Stop relying on your database. Why? Because that helps you go back and question, well, wait a minute, did I get the death certificate for Grandpa Babe? Or did I just fill the date in because that's what the Louisiana Death Index told me? Right? So just as we can sit here and challenge the newbies, us seasoned folks can be challenged as well. So you've established, you started your pedigree chart, whether it's online in a tree or you're just writing down on a piece of paper. What then next? I love how True's holding up the paper. What then next should you do once you've gathered names and information?
Well, I'm going to give you an example of what I do. And one thing, I want to support you on the writing. I still to this day hand write everything. And then if I do put it in a database or whatever, like I was meeting with a lady on Sunday, and to understand her tree, I had to write it out You know how you put her name, I did my arrow, her parents, and I wrote that. Now I know her tree, but that's also how I do. If I don't write it down, I can't keep track of it, because we have so many names and information in our brains regarding this. But another thing I wanted to say before you go to the next topic is you got to figure out how you're going to organize this.
Right.
And if you're going to write it, how you going to write it? What's your pattern? What's your system? So those that are brand new, listen to us, because we have all done it differently. And then we learn later to get organized, because it gets so much. We got the books, and look behind Ellen, the books. I have 4 bookcases to the right of me, right? And I'm screaming, thinking I need another one in my bedroom. And so what is your system that you're going to organize your file, or how you're going to keep the notebook, and I don't have my book back here with me, but I even got the stickies that tabs it out where I can pull each family, with my little daily notebook where I'm basically journaling what my research is. So
have a small research goal. Don't
yeah,
multitask too much in the beginning, because it's just going to lead to confusion later on.
Yeah.
Try to figure out what your goal is, and then determine what you have that's not there, and work yourself from there one at a time. I don't know what to say. It's just I kind of just been like with everybody else. I started before there was a computer, and
yeah,
I had all these elders living, my great grandparents that were from the 1800s. I was raised by my grandparents. So I seen and heard a lot, and I knew to keep those, but I just didn't know what to do with it. But when I got older and had time on my hands, I was able to go ahead and ask those questions of my mom and dad and my elders before they left. I seen my aunts doing it, running reunions and saying, we got to find this piece of paper. I picked up a lot of stuff from them, and some of them might have been bad habits at the time, but I've refined those into what we're supposed to do, by going to conferences, Maggie for one, because I really had a big mess right here, as y'all can see, and I still keep it, but I still go back to this because that's where all my notes from 1998 are. And I've just been working from all that stuff that I, before we could get online and AOL and use the PATH programs and whatnot. But I started out with a little goal. Okay, they got all this stuff down, but where's the document at? Well, where's the birth certificate at? And that's where my job came in is at. I had all this information, had all this stuff written down, but nobody had the papers to it. So
this brings up an important point though, right? Because we can sit here and tell people forever to go and interview the folks and go and search the home repository, right? Because that in itself is a lot of times is where a lot of clues are hiding, right?
Yes.
Before you even jump online, I got an obituary sitting right here on my desk.
Yeah.
For my cousin Blue. He died. Look at him with the cigarette in his hand in the car. Okay. Right. This has there's a whole bio in here for this funeral program. Who was doing the service? Who were the pallbearers? What the obituary is, when he was born, where he worked, all that stuff, right? Where the funeral was held, where he's buried, all of those things are in this one program, right? And in terms of the African-American community, this is a huge resource because people are maniacal about these programs, okay? If you're not sure about that, go back and watch our episode all about death, dying, and fumes, okay? When me and True had our fascinators and whatnot, we talk about that at length. We have a whole life after death episode where we talk about death records, right? But the average person has a ton of records that are already existing in their home that can inform and fill in some of the holes where people may not be able to remember the details. But even still, right, we're telling people write it down, put it online, do whatever. You still need a system. So I started with literally probably the first version of like Family Tree Maker. Now that I think about the design, oh boy, that design was horrible. But I'm a creature of habit, so I still use Family Tree Maker. Family Tree Maker is a standalone genealogy software that allows you to sync your family tree that's held locally on your computer to one that's on Ancestry or Family Search. Those are the two primary services. But some folks may have, right? They may want to scan and put everything everything in that database, Shelley has a folder method. So Shelley, talk about your folder method that you use.
Yes.
The folder method is, if everybody's seen those legal size or letter size folders that has the flaps, and inside, some of them are flaps and pockets. And so I have an 89-year-old person that lives with me, Mama. So I needed something to be consistent. So I adapted my research files the way my HUD Section 8 files were, getting ready for an audit. I swear, this is where it came from. So each flap contained specific documents. So at the end, I had the census. And of course, they started from the earliest census that person is in coming forward. So say 1940 would be on the top. So each flap, I had memberships, you know, like military memberships, church stuff was a folder, all the land stuff, and anything connected like that. Then the vital statistics was another folder. But when you first open it up, you got the working file, and I'd have my family group sheet here, or, you know,
That's
a
what
picture of
these
the
are.
tree or something like that.
Yeah.
But I worked from the very first flap on the right, which is wherever the brick walls were at. So I stayed focused on that. But every time, and again, before the internet got crazy, I would always call home, Mama, pull a file, look at this, look at this. So I had to use a system that was consistent so she could pull and go right to something. So they were labeled for a while. We don't have to label them anymore. But that's how I do, and how I show them at Maggie is also, you can do it any way you want. Just make sure you have something that's consistent. Those
So
folders
Shelley, I
are,
wanna make sure this is what you're talking about.
yes. Is there flaps in the inside? And I could get one, but
Yeah, people are asking, but then you're
yeah,
saying
if
That
this
one, the one on the orange.
you need the flaps in the inside, so that's not it. It's the
okay.
same folder, but there's sections in it. I'm gonna excuse myself.
Sure.
You keep going, and I will go grab one.
Okay.
While she's doing that, I'll just say that I know I'm not the only one that is still a mess kind of when it comes to my handwritten files. I started in the 1990s, and I was just doing this for me. I never knew I was going to end up talking to people on the internet. Didn't even have the internet then. Just was trying to find out where I came from. So all of my handwritten stuff from my early visits to courthouses and, you know, repositories all over the place and interviewing people, they were just all over the place. I tried a color-coded system, but that didn't work for me. And so what I'm doing now is trying to kind of digitize my handwritten notes and put them in electronic folders. But what I wanted to say is that I do a timeline for each of my direct ancestors. And so I use just a simple Word, Microsoft Word, and I use a vertical timeline for each ancestor, so that each time I find new information about them, I can just insert the date, you know, go in with my cursor in the right place chronologically, insert the date, and put what that new information is. And then at the very end of that timeline, I have research questions that I would like to find answers to about that ancestor. And when I find the answers to those, then I can delete that question. Well, I don't ever delete it. I just cross through it because I want to make sure I don't repeat that again. So that's a system that I use, but I don't do it for all 4,000 some ancestors that I have on the tree. I just do it for my direct ancestors.
Some of the younger folks, what are some of the things you do? Because I started off with the database, and that's something that helps me stay organized. I still do have a file folder system, but a lot of the stuff that I'm keeping now is digital. I'm not printing out a lot of things. So I'm more maniacal, so to speak, about how I label files and folders so that I can find things easily. You know, I often talk about folks who save everything on the desktop. They got 3,000 files on the desktop or in the downloads folder, right? I know I'm talking about you, it's okay. And so for me, I label, as I'm finding documents and things online, or as I'm gathering things in person, I am doing, I'm scanning them, I'm saving them, and I have a syntax to the folders that I have where it's my 4 grandparents. And then within those folders for those respective grandparents are their parents. And then it branches out. The documents that are shared amongst the 2 people are within the folder that, contains both of their folders. And then I label the documents, because this is something else that we have a problem with. People should be able to get back to whatever you found, right? So that means if you have a deed or vital record or whatever it is, you should be labeling it with the book and the page, the county, and maybe some of the parties who are involved. But that way you're very succinct and you can get back to where you found it, versus 01257634478, which is whatever the website labels it. It may not necessarily be what it needs to be labeled. So Shelley, do you have your example before we move on to the next question?
Yes. So here's one of the folders, and I'm going to open it up. See the flaps in the inside? And they all got the two prong punch up at top. So here's a look at one, and I just pulled the pension record out. So each flap has specific things that are going to only be in that spot. There's the little cover sheet on the census, and it tells everyone the census that the ancestor, showed up in. And memberships, there was military records there. So that it's really simple, but the folders are expensive.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing. They are expensive. I didn't have to pay for them. So when I gave up the Section 8 program, we went all digital. So we scanned everything in. So I took all the folders. So, but anyway.
I placed a link in the chat to the example with its legal size, with the prongs on each section, just so if people were interested in trying to order those, they could do that. And so moving forward, right? So you've already gone through the process of, interviewing people. You've already gone through the process of searching the home repository, gathering documents. Remember, this is not just your house. This could be the home of a family member who, my grandmother was the funeral program woman, and she went to everybody's funeral, didn't matter who it was. And she has programs from all over the place. She used to send us funeral programs for people. And I'm just like, is all she do is just stay at the mortuary and just go to people's services? Like, that's all she does. So you have folks who are like that, who are very maniacal about, funeral programs. You have people who are always collecting all the vital records, right? There may be stuff that's within your possession that is good, but you also need to connect with other family members. So once you do that, once you get your system of organization together, it could be digital documents that you're housing in folders on your computer, or you can take the method that Shelley talked about, which is, with her legal folder from her hood Section 8 stuff. What?
I will tell you, I do the exact same thing online.
Okay.
And we present that as a different way. You start with the master folder, and then you just do each folder inside the same way the flaps are, and then have a miscellaneous. So then you can do it all online. So I have both. I have
so she's
files. Yeah.
I think most of us do. If you've been doing this for an extended period of time, you do have both. So, okay. So once we've done that, then we're jumping into the waters of searching online, right? To fill in more blanks, right? Or to go back several generations. Where do you all place certain steps in this process in terms of searching online? When I kind of sit down with folks and I'm doing consultations, I really kind of gear folks towards staying on one branch of the family, and following that through until maybe it goes cold, versus jumping around here or there. What do you all feel, or what's the process that you all take with online searches?
Yeah, I also like to look geographically, also like to think about the family geographically, or think about what's going on locally, to kind of anchor that information into a place, so that I'm sure that I have the right people, and it's not really something that's just kind of, that they're actually the people I'm looking for. I've had situations where family clusters in adjacent municipalities, and you had like 2 families marrying about the same time, and they're cousins, and they must have known genealogists were in their future. They named all their kids the same thing. So they'll tend to have, you'll have two clusters, and it just takes time then to sit down and just kind of be sure that you've got the right people that you're following, you know.
Okay, what do you, go ahead, Alex?
So one of the first things that I do with clients, or if even with in my own research with like DNA matches, which I know is a little later in the conversation, one of the first things that I do is I try to build a skeleton tree, which pretty much just consists of immediate ancestry, not necessarily like the nuclear family. So what I do is I look at place. So for instance, if I'm researching mostly online, again, I'm a student, so I can't travel to every archive and location all the time to like dig for these original records that may not be online. But I think about the states. So I tell people all the time, if you're from Mississippi, you got to give me a month. If you're from Texas, I got you. If you're from Alabama, now I got you. If you're from Florida, wrap it up. Arkansas, wrap it up. I can't do nothing like, I'm kidding y'all, I promise. But at the same time, we have to think about what's available when we're first going online. So I like to think about that, like Ellen said, think about it geographically, but I also try to do a community scan. So I have this kind of lingo where I call places base communities. So that means the community that your family would have been from prior to migrations. So most of us have them. So for mine, my maternal base community is Owasso, Alabama. None of y'all heard of it. That's okay. South of Montgomery, north of Mobile. There you go. But in the meantime, I know that if I can look in Owasso, Alabama, that means that like most of those people were in Owasso, Alabama, or the surrounding little towns, at least since they were brought to Alabama in the 1818s. Now, if you're coming out of somewhere like Houston, Texas, people are still moving into Houston, Texas. You heard? So like you're going to have to think about it in the sense of, okay, well, where did they come from prior to this? What would have been the case? Arkansas, for instance, if you look at it from the lens of slavery, people were being brought like late in the 50s and stuff. So like you have to think about these things as far as like where you're going to be searching. But my process pretty much consists of, first I start with familysearch.org. I look at what's available for that state and what's available for that family based off of my consultation with the client or with whoever I'm working at. And then I move over to Ancestry and see what other like grand details Ancestry may provide in my online search. And I still take it back old school. When I first started, I was researching off of a Metro PC, little Nokia, I swear y'all, a little Nokia. And I was using that internet browser for hours, pressing the button over and over again until I seen the word McIntyre or Hawthorne or whatever the case is from Owasso. But I still will go to those US Gen Web archives, those Gen forums, and see what people already may have laid the ground for. Because there's some powerful tools and details in there. I have a cousin, now I've confirmed how she's a cousin, but she was researching well in the 90s and early 2000s, had like a good 10 years on me. She's passed away now, but she posted, transcriptions of death records, transcriptions of land records, things that actually now are digitized. I wouldn't have had any access to as a little big-eared black boy from East Sacramento in 2008. I wouldn't have had access to that. Now I do. But like you have to go and look at that, and I guarantee you there's going to be something there.
Well, but there's also another point that needs to be raised though too, is before you know about community, you need to know where your people are, like period, point blank. You don't know that a migration took place if this is the first steps that you're taking in genealogy, right? All you know is Wewoka, Oklahoma. You don't know anything out of that. In fact, some people may just know a state. So the clues are usually going to be hiding on the documents that you are gathering, whether it's online or whether it's in person, that will tell you, this program talks about how he was born in Delhi, Louisiana. But wait a minute, but the funeral was in San Bernardino, California. How do we go from Delhi to San Bernardino? What happened between 1954 and 2019 that got him from Delhi, Louisiana? Where is Delhi? Is that near New Orleans? Is it near Shreveport? Right? The reason why I'm bringing us back to this is because think about beginners, you guys. A lot of folks, when they go online initially, right, or in the environment that they're in right now, folks don't think critically. that there's a whole lot in this dash between 1954 and 2019 that you have to categorize, right? That you have to figure out, which is why in some ways doing the timeline method makes you think more critically about what that dash stands for and what it means, right? And so some of this is geography, like beginning geography. With me, my process, if I'm working for a client or working, consulting, doing whatever, if I'm not clear on the county structure of that particular state or the geography of that particular area, the first thing I do is I go on Google Maps and map out, where is it at? What's the nearest major city, right? Because here's the other thing. Those guides that are on Family Search are amazing for counties. I don't know why enough people don't use those, because they will tell you, when was the county formed, right? What were the parent counties, right? And then from there, you can say, okay, well, if it's before 1932, Delhi is in, this parish, whereas before that it was in another one. So if you go all willy-nilly looking for a census trying to find one in a parish, that you're gonna come up with zero results, right? So in the process of online searching, we have to ask ourselves these questions. As we extract information, we have to ask questions every single time. We went through that biology of a document. That's another episode that we had for BlackProGen Live. You get your whole life from us. You really could. But even still, right? What are some of the other steps that you all, certain parts of the process, right? Alex likes a community search. Ellen talked about people having different names and being able to decipher between one Juan Valdez and another Juan Valdez, where his mama's name is Olivia and the other one's his wife is named Josefina, and we want to know, well, which one is the right one, right? I'm just giving examples, right? You have to use identifiers, family members, location where the people lived, right? What are some of the other steps you take when you're searching online and you're trying to fill in holes?
Well, one thing you brought up, timelines. That's a basic. And if they're not starting off doing that, they'll probably never do it. And they'll do a lot more work that's not going to produce results for them. Because I think if they get to the basics, stick to the basics. You held up Tony Burrell's book. I have reread that book at least 6 times and followed his steps. He didn't believe me, but I told him, yeah, mine's over there too. And he didn't really, I told him, I said, I do everything that's in your book. And every time I get a brick wall, I go back to the basics. And there's another book, which is Woodtor, her book is another one.
It's not in print anymore. You can get used copies, but it's not in print. I'll put the link in the chat room.
Copies probably, but people need to identify something to follow, the go-to. The internet is not your go-to. So again, deal with what you can with paper, looking at documents if you can, but stick to the basics in doing a basic timeline. You showed on the program, on the funeral program, you had a time frame. So I'm starting with the birth, or possibly leaving a couple lines for the parents because of the location, and then start finding everywhere you find that ancestor during a time and date it, and then write in what questions you have at the end. And we can always share that basic timeline somewhere, an attachment or something, if anybody wants to see it. Maggie folks get one if they, come through the track. But I think that's a place you're going to find out what you're missing or what you don't know as you go through the years. Like every 10 years, there's going to be a federal census and things like that. So when you're missing stuff because it's not adding up right and it's not looking right in the timeline.
There are a couple of questions from the chat room. Our buddy in genealogy, Karen Harper Royal, says, does anyone store your information in an online format in addition to physical files and files on your computer? And I would say, yes, I do. For me, it's more from the perspective of if I've gone to let's say the Mississippi State Archives where they don't allow you to do digital scans there, I'm going to have a paper copy, but then I want to be able to use it digitally in some way. So I usually will scan it. So I'll have the digital copy and I'll have the physical copy. But if something is originated as a digital copy, I don't always make a printed version of it to store it because, I don't have Ellen's gigantic bookshelf. Like I wish I had Ellen's gigantic bookshelf, but I do not. I have a you know, like a kiddie version of Ellen's gigantic bookshelf. But so yeah, I would say I would imagine that you know, the panelists also chimed in earlier that they do keep copies. Some people keep copies of both, some people one or the other. To me, it really all depends on what I'm working on. And so something else, another question from the chat room. What about determining the right spouse or whether a relative was married more than once? Like, how do you decipher that? Like, what are some of the tools that you all use in those scenarios?
Well, one tool that I use is the actually the census record. The 1910 census record will tell you if they've been married more than once. That's actually how I found out that my great grandfather was married more than once. Was through that, or even on family search, they'll have sometimes the marriage. What is it? The marriage record, not the license, but the marriage record, and they'll identify either if they were married more than once or not. So.
And also I would say if a social security application index, like the applications index, right? You find
really
a family member and it has like, maybe the dad is right, but the mom's got a different name than the wife that you know, right? Because if the mother died in childbirth and this other woman came in and raised the baby soon after, who would know that you know what I mean? That there was a different mother involved. So there are several records. I mean, you gotta kind of clue yourself in.
And look for the applications, like you said, because it's going to ask you if this is your first marriage, or like my grandfather, the first wife died in 1911. Doesn't have her name, but that tells me he was married before. She died in 1911. I got to find her. I've got to resolve that. Was there any kids there? So more questions start coming up that I need to answer.
Well, and I think it also brings up another important point. Our genealogy friend, Genealogy Jen, said, look at who was living with them on the census too, which is great.
Sure.
But I've seen several scenarios where people are marked with the wrong relationship.
That's because we don't know who gave it.
Exactly. And we don't know. I mean, you know, 1940, right? They marked who gave it. But before that, we don't know if the neighbor gave the information. We don't know if they came to the house and asked little baby, and little baby 7, and he doesn't know mama's name. It's just mama. So they put Ma Rainey instead of Betty, which was her name. I mean, you know, and then relationships are different, right? You know, they didn't really have a lot of space to write. So how are they going to put step great granddaughter in that one little box, right? So, you know, so that's the thing. And we've got to be mindful of not, and the other piece is when you have censuses that don't have relationships like 1850 and 1860, assuming that everyone who's in the household is a child of the head of household, or, you know, whoever that person is. We've got to be mindful.
Or it's a husband and a wife, and they're not
exactly.
It's a brother and a sister that are in there. There is on the census, and you can Google it, but it's the instructions to the census takers, and you get it from the Census Bureau, and it gives you what they were told to collect and what things meant. And again, the only thing is not knowing who gave the information, but they were supposedly trained, 7th grade education back then, not 7th grade that we know now. So it's clearly even how people heard their surnames and the spellings. This is what happened when you had people that you don't know who's given what information. That's why we have, you know, spelling doesn't count type thing, or the dates are wrong, or the relationships are wrong. Don't always assume that's mama and daddy at the head of the household.
Agree. And I go, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ellen.
I just wanted to mention a situation that I've seen several times in census records where someone is born out of wedlock, and as they grow up over the years of the census, they're trying, you can literally see them figure out like what that relationship was. Like they either take on their father's surname, and then you watch them keep it or hold it or drop it. And you'll see that happen like over a 30-year period even. It's really interesting. Or you'll see a family where they married, but all of a sudden, like all the kids' names have changed because they were literally adopted by the person who married them. So there's stories in there that sometimes it takes a little bit to suss out between the discrepancy and then maybe information that you can get from your family. And also don't forget to read the other half of the census. Don't forget to look
Oh,
at
yeah.
like the information on whether somebody's renting, on whether somebody is like what the job is, what they're doing, and was the kid going to school? Is anybody, look, the enumerator thinks that nobody here can read or whatever. I mean, but all of those things give you like little hints that you can like work into your timeline, or kind of help to flesh out either identities or family situations that you're trying to look into.
Yeah, and since the census is a seminal tool that we all use, I would like to assign homework to our viewers this evening. We just placed a link inside of the public chat for this episode that goes directly to the Census Bureau and the census instructions from starting from the very first census all the way until 2010. And I wanted to just share, I think we should, for the censuses that you have questions, why certain questions, were answered a certain way, why people referred to race a certain way. Maybe you're not familiar with the actual census date. Right? Like, when was the census certified as of which date, right? Because not all of them are the same. The later ones are going to go into April. The earlier ones are June. It really all depends on when the person came and asked the information. And like this is very simple stuff, but here's the thing. If you want to be a sound researcher and you want to kick behind doing this and you want to get as far as possible, especially with DNA, because I always remind people, there is no genealogy without DNA and there is no DNA without genealogy. They both go hand in hand. They work together.
Right.
You've got to be clear on what is going on. All right, so let's look at this briefly. And this is the instructions for 1870, which of course for people of color is a very pivotal census, right? It talks about numbering of dwelling houses, right? Eating houses, stores, shops. Family is meant by one or more persons living together, provided for in common. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're related.
Right.
This is 1870, so no relationships are on the census. And you got names of individuals. Column 3 will be entered the name of every person in each family of whatever age, including the names of such that were temporarily absent on the first day of June 1870. So this means that if somebody was not at the place the day that the census taker came along, they were still enumerated. So you can't necessarily assume that everybody that's enumerated on that census was actually living in that house at that particular point in time. So if you have a situation where there's a paw cracking off in your family and genetically you haven't been able to figure it out, it may be that person maybe was not definitively in that location in 1870. They were somewhere else. These are things to keep in mind, okay? The name of any member of the family who may have died between the first day of June 1870 and the day the assistant marshal's visit was to be entered. And the person fully described as if living. So that means the dead folks are on the 1870 census, you guys.
They are. Yes.
Come on now, we're whipping the wigs off, okay? Look, Carmen is in the chat room going, oh Lord.
But Nika, this is how I solved the first wife, second wife of who the child was, based on a child, because of, say, the June, it was 1840 census or whatever, it was taken, and when a child was born and which wife was alive and which one was dead. And it was because I read these darn instructions. I mean, they're valuable. Gene Cooper's the one that told me about them. I never knew this was out there. And it's a free download.
Yes, it's free. You can download all of them. You can save your bookmarks. But look at this: the family name written first column, then full first or characteristic Christian or given name of each member of the family in order thereafter. So as long as the family name remains the same for several family members, it need not to be repeated. So when you get mad that there's a line because Mama Lizzie should have deserved, because we don't know if this was her first or second husband or what's going on.
Right.
Don't get mad, because those were the instructions that the census taker was given, you all. Right? Look at this. Seafaring men are to be reported at their land homes no matter how long they may have been absent.
Out to sea. Yeah.
If they were out to sea. Okay? If they're supposed to be still alive. So you don't even know if your husband had dropped dead. He's just at sea. He's on 1872. right? Personal description. Oh, yeah, but here's the good part, because we care about this, right? Because, Mama Sarah was noted as mulatto on this census. Well, what was mulatto based on what they were taught, right?
Correct.
So it says filled out, sex, age, sex, color, the person enumerated, no return will be accepted when these spaces are blank. So this means that if an enumerator did not go and ask those people those particular questions or
Right.
filled them out, it was sent back to them.
Yeah.
All right. Exact age and figures, color. It must not be assumed that where nothing is written in this column, white is to be understood. Let me blow this up obnoxiously for everybody. We're gonna make sure y'all see all of this. Let's see what it says color right here. Hold on, we got new tools on BlackProGen Live, so let me go ahead and annotate for
Be
y'all.
careful. It says particularly careful. Keep
Mulatto.
yes.
Okay.
And includes quadroons.
Yeah.
Includes quadroons. Be particularly careful. Be particularly careful
And
of
octoroons.
reporting, right? Reporting the class mulatto. I want to make sure do y'all see this? Y'all see it, don't you? It's
Yeah.
where it says mulatto. Y'all see it, right? Where it says that you got to be careful with these people.
Yeah.
The word here is generic and includes quadroons, octoroons, all persons having any perceptible trace of African blood.
I got you.
Important scientific results depend on the correct determination of this class in schedules 1 and 2.
Can I make another comment?
Oh, sure.
Shades of eugenics.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I wasn't going to hit there, but what I was going to say is remember who's taking the census.
Yeah.
And do you think they always followed these instructions, what they were supposed to have?
Come on now.
Okay. That's all I wanted to say.
Value of all real estate owned by the person enumerated without any deduction on account of mortgage or other encumbrance, whether within or without the census subdivision. So this means that if somebody is listed with property, with real estate, it does not necessarily have to be in the same county that they're enumerated in.
Correct. Not where the money's at.
That's so interesting. The personal estate, I've seen people enumerated when they have personal property under $100. I've seen that.
I've seen it too, but clearly, go ahead, Alex.
When we explain what personal property and real estate is, for a lot of people, we would think personal property may be like, I think I've seen it get mistaken for real estate. Real estate is your land, it's your ground,
Right.
It cannot be moved.
Right.
Your personal property could be hogs, it could be tools, it could be clothing, it could be all of these things that are considered movables. But it's really important to note that because when we think about communities, when we're back in 1870, oftentimes our family was in 1870 was in that same place in 1870 for a good couple decades. So really think about 1870 as a starting point. But in the meantime, if you notice that there is a Black family living near yours with this much property value, follow them. They were probably preachers, teachers, somebody knew how to read. Somebody was doing something that probably affected your family. So look at them also. We used to say this whole BS rule about 10 pages on either side, but look at them between the first property owner to the next property owner and really get a sense of where they are. It's important, y'all.
Well, and if you have enslaved or people who you believe were enslaved, look at the laws of what enslaved people were allowed to do. A lot of folks, especially in Louisiana, folks forget that it was legal for slaves to hire themselves out or their owners to hire them out, and they would be able to keep the profits. That was fully legal in the state of Louisiana. So if you have family members who were in an area like that where they were working and they seemed to emerge in 1870 with $1,000 worth of personal estate or $1,000 worth of real estate, there you go. So we'll go back to our little census thing real quick, just to kind of grab some wigs, because see, this is the thing. If you are only reading the census for the name and the age and the gender and the race. You are missing so much more if you're not going column by column to read this information. So look at this. You say personal estate to be inclusive of all bonds, stocks, mortgages, notes, livestock, plate, jewels, or furniture, but exclusive of wearing apparel. So they couldn't claim clothes. No report will be made when the personal property is under $100. We've seen exceptions to that. Column 10 will contain the place of birth of every person named upon the schedule. If born within the U.S., the state or territory will be named, whether it be a state or territory in which the person is at present residing or not. If a foreign birth, the country will be named specifically as possible. Remember, this is whatever it was referred to at that time, not necessarily what we refer to it now. So look into the definitions or the changes in how countries were referred to. If a foreign birth, the country will name it specifically as possible. Instead of writing Great Britain as the place of birth, give the particular country as England, Scotland, Wales. Instead of Germany, specify the state as Prussia, Baden, Bavaria, Württemberg, Hesse, Darmstadt, etc. Right? So your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to go through these censuses where you have question marks about how something was marked, and go through and read these instructions. Look in that section. Have this as a handy dandy tool, right? Let's see, the 11 through like 11, 12, 15, 16, 17, 19, and 20 are such a nature that these columns only require to be filled when the answer to the inquiry is yes. Notice how they shift here, right? You couldn't leave a race box blank and assume it's white.
That's key right there. Especially for African, well, it's for everybody, not just African American. You cannot always assume that they are white if it's blank, especially think about going down a page.
Yeah.
And you start off with white, white, black, black, then it's blank. That don't mean they were all black after that either.
There's some, and at one point in Ancestry, they didn't be as black in the Puerto Rican for the census in Puerto Rico. Yeah. So you got to just see what's on the document.
Yeah.
I just wanted to squeeze in there.
Go ahead, Ellen.
I'm
sorry.
Renata.
Sorry, go Renata. Sorry, Renata.
I wanted to squeeze in there, since back when you were talking about finding the dead people, to be sure to check for the mortality schedules also from 1850 to 1880, I think it is, because that's going to show you the names of people that died in the previous year. And so that's another helpful part. And all of the extra schedules that go with each census year should not be overlooked, but those are very helpful.
Agreed.
And the mortality schedules are not online for every state. Some states, they've got a multitude of them, some they don't, but just be sure to go in and check. Also, in addition to this federal census, there are state censuses that exist, right? So don't neglect those. We've ad nauseum told you guys about, we've covered shows on state specific resources. So that shouldn't be where you're like, I don't know how to say, nope, you got 92 plus episodes to look at that particular information. Moving forward, in what ways do you all feel the traditional structure of genealogy and family history fails when it comes to people of color, right? Because, you know, we talked about some of these nuances a little bit tonight, right? Where, you know, people may be disconnected from the ancestral environment, and some of that may have to do with lynching, right? Your family left the area, so that's why you have no connection to where your family's from, or some traumatic event, or maybe it was the Great Migration and people wanted to forget that agrarian lifestyle and wanted to be more, you know, of the city and where they were from, right? What ways do you feel that the traditional structure, right, as it has been set up for genealogy, where do you feel it fails when it comes to people of color?
Access. I mean, how many of y'all, can I just tell my story really fast? So when I started researching, I still had 3 great grandparents living, 2 living within the state that I would spend time with regularly. When I started, so I got a lot of information to start with, but when I started researching, I had D. Palmer,
her book. I know.
I had that. That was the first book. I stole it from a library, y'all. I stole it from a library. I turned it back when I turned 18.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I just wanted to lighten the mood. But in the meantime, that was one of the first resources. And of course, that book was largely informative. But as I was going through and researching, I'm like, okay, I can only do so much from this Metro PC phone. Eventually, I'm going to have to get into the beloved Family History Center. Now, luckily, I lived in a city where there was one there for most of my life. So I grew up in Sacramento mostly. And finally, I had an aunt take me to that Family History Center. And we get in there and they're like, at this time, y'all remember, Obama hadn't really been elected yet. Like, we still in campaign time. So equity, inclusion, and diversity wasn't really a thing outside of universities. So when we walk in, they say, oh, well, how can we help you? That's what I got. And I said, well, I'm looking for this guy. And I had my great-grandfather who had passed away's obituary. I said, I want to find more on his family. So we sit down for, again, Alabama. We looking through census records. The last name was Palmore. It wasn't transcribed correctly. So we couldn't really find anything. And at the time, like censuses 1900 and on down weren't free on Family Search. They were only free. They were only accessible at Ancestry, and Ancestry was really for a young kid, was only available at libraries and the Family History Center. So let's keep going. One of the things that they did was finally sit down with me as I'm struggling. My aunt then left because she got bored, and I'm like, I'm a crack at it. Well, they say, okay, well, let's Google. So they Google. Every post were websites that I had made, and I'm like, that's me. So they told me I would never be able to find anything on my family. Well, here I am on BlackProGen Live over 10 years later. But in the meantime, that was one of the biggest things, was that there was nothing said to be available. Then, we get into the conferences, and then there was this whole scare before, like the Nika Smiths and some of you all on this panel, Melvin Collier and other people broke down this myth of the 1870 brick wall, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, well, you're going to hit that 1870 brick wall. You ain't going to find nothing. You ain't got no people before 1870. And that was heartbreaking.
People do this.
So,
well, but you bring up, that's the thing. I mean, you bring up very important points, because, let's just be real, you guys. One of the oldest, if not the oldest, genealogical society in the nation said that people sitting on this panel had nothing in common with them, genealogically speaking. Yes, like those aren't words that I'm just making up. Like, that's literally what they said. They had to, the board had to vote to allow a person of color into that society. So those are the structures that I'm talking about that don't support traditional structures, that don't support people of color. Alex's experience going to the Family History Center is not unique. I've heard several people say that they experienced that, but we have to remember these people are missionaries, right? Mm-hmm. Their clientele who they're working with may not necessarily be of African descent. I've seen where folks have gone to Family History Centers, and there's one particular person who works well with African American research that they will specifically, put together with people who are of African descent to make sure that they do find things. But even still, you talk about access, right? Access is a huge thing because of records that are chosen to be digitized before other record sets that are crucial, right? Why are we just now getting the full digitization of the field office records for the Freedmen's Bureau? Like, why did that just happen? Like, it hasn't even been 10 years yet, right? Some of this has to do with acquisitions, right? Family Search and them, investing in the digitization of their records has democratized genealogy in a way that has not been done previously, because there's no, from what we can see, there's no part that says, well, we're going to choose the white records first. No, they're just scanning films. It doesn't matter who's on them, right? Mm-hmm. So you have that. You have, and I just presented about this in Virginia, right? Where you have universities such as LSU down in Louisiana who are looking at diversity and inclusion from the perspective of their archives, what they go after in terms of purchasing, in terms of collections, what they choose to digitize first, right? Where they recognize that racist systems have been in play in terms of what has been archived. and what's available to the public. And then if you seek out grants to digitize these things, to make them available for multiple researchers from all over the place, right? Not just folks who can come to you in person. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. Anyone else want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think and I had just shared it with you, but there's also like the census taker, regardless of the instructions, it was still their perspective. And if they thought you were white, black, or whatever, and it's also in other records, there was a lot of assumptions or just being nasty or mean, whatever you want to call it. But also think about when Virginia, as an example, give them another assignment, Nika, have them look up Mr. Walter
C. Plecker.
Yes.
Okay, no more discussion. They need to report back and let us know about Mr. Plecker.
Yeah, there's homework you need to do. You need to read at least one census guide. And number two, you need to look up who Walter Plecker is, which I think we're going to cover that. I think in episode 95, who has the right to tell my people stories, is either that
we'll
or
make sure it's included.
Genealogy, yeah, in popular culture, because that drives a lot of the perceptions and stuff. Yes,
Dr. Walter Plecker.
Yes, Alex.
I want to chime in back to your original question about things that are like problems in the traditional genealogy community and in genealogy work. I think that one other thing that affects people of color immensely is the fact that, besides the many of us who are in this community, think about the people coming on the outside. What they're initially getting, they're going to get all of these big names, and we ain't going to name them unless y'all want me to, because I will. But, they're going to get them first oftentimes, and they're going to apply that logic to their own study. And oftentimes they'll experience that disillusionment and that heartbreak, and also that waste of time that this same experience is not going to apply to them. So in genealogy, essentially was founded from a white Anglo perspective, was founded on making sure that you were not other. And that was the whole purpose and point of it. So when we look at those initial class issues that someone just mentioned in our chat, when we look at that, that's not going to apply to someone who may descend from someone who's from an immigrant, non-traditional, enslaved, so on and so forth background, or all these different varieties, but also the community will still praise things like homesteaders. Let's not forget what land was being stolen to provide for those homesteaders. When you want to talk about your Pioneers Association and all this stuff, I'm the furthest out west right now, all we talk about are pioneers and cowboys and all this stuff. But let's talk about the things that they did. I'm not praising your ancestor, baby. I'm not going to do it. Your ancestor was a killer. But when we're researching them, let's talk about the ways that our ancestors had to gravel and grind in order to live with that. That's something that we should always think about and apply. But that is certainly something that it stops me, you guys. It stops me from attending conferences, from reading books and blogs, because it becomes noise and it's sickening. There's people of color.
Well, and there's one of our viewers, Michelle Marsden, something that she just shared in the chat room. While researching the white slave owning family, the librarian literally told me that, quote, I didn't need the family's estate file. She refused to give it to me.
Wow.
And she said she had to go look it up on microfilm instead of the actual documents. This was at the Georgia State Archives in 2003. But a lot of
that happens to me. I dare somebody.
I'm gonna cut up for Michelle, and I'm gonna cut up for all of us. But there still is there's a whole culture of archiving and searching while Black on site, right? Yes. The expectations that people have for the documents you're gonna request, for whether or not your real purpose for being in there. Are you serious? Are you an academician? Whatever it is, there's so many things, and it really all depends on exposure, right? To people, to topics, to all of those things. Like here I was in old liberal Elizabeth Warren country last weekend, and I walked into the archives without issue, no problem. In fact, when I was talking to these folks about this man being a slaveholder, they didn't flinch at all. They're like, yep, we know.
Well, that's Georgia.
But that's what I was gonna say. But there still is a difference. So last question I have before we get into viewer comments and current events, because we have a pretty meaty one we need to get to tonight. In your opinion, right? Because a lot of folks feel like once they get going pretty well in terms of research, right? Started with what they knew, with what ancestors knew, you know, or family members knew, got their system together, created their online tree, effectively learned how to search, right? You are theoretically learning how to do all these things by watching BlackProGen live. Like we literally have given you the entire toolkit of what you need. Some people will choose to try to go into this as a professional occupation, right? And one of the biggest questions I always get from people is, you know, do you think that certification legitimizes a researcher?
No.
No.
No. Oh no. Mm-mm.
Never has.
Tell
I'm
me
not
why.
certified. I've been researching 30 years, and I'll charge anybody to step right with me with your certification or not. I think it might open up some other avenues for you. But again, 30 years of experience or however everybody has in what you do, especially researching people of color, you have, and I do both. You have to expand that horizon, and certification is not going to get that for me. It will work maybe for a client, but then again, my clients have not been unhappy with their deliverables. You know, so no.
The idea of certification to research your own. So first and foremost, I don't think that, so like, you know, we have this web show, we have other sources and so on and so forth that are doing a tremendous work getting people started in researching and giving them advanced level skills. However, from my perspective, I don't think that everyone needs to research. I don't think that it should be everyone's task to research. This information should be easily accessible and given to people, because this is labor that we all do. You know, you heard me? This is labor that we do. We know how much time, money, and tears that we have put into this work for our own research and others. But in the meantime, do you think that we need a piece of paper to tell us that we can accurately tell the experiences of our own and our ancestors? You got to be kidding me. White supremacy will have us over here thinking that we need the validation of that, and we don't.
And I don't think they push that per se, the certification or the accreditation. What I think, I know I'm trying to stay calm here. Just
Okay.
I see you, Nika, just stay calm. But I think the purpose, my belief that certification is good for those that are going to run their business. And then they're adding some credentials to it. But again, you think of the professional organization like APG, Association for Professional Genealogists. I don't even think there's 15% of their membership are certified. So, and people are still doing the research. They're still delivering to clients. That's good. I think for people that want it and that want the credential, I got a doctorate. It's not flaunted all over the place. Half the time I have to be told to say that, you know, which is fine, but it doesn't mean I do anything better than anybody else or bring anything better to the table. I'm going to share my experience and what I have walked through and walked in other people's shoes at. Simple as that.
There's other folks in the chat room who are chiming in. There's some stories I think that also need to be told, because this whole idea of researching while Black really does exist.
Oh yeah.
yes.
Oh yeah.
So I think one of the pitfalls of the traditional structure that we're talking about is the whole idea of the exhaustive search and what that means under the framing of people of color's experience, and how it's interesting that technically oral history should not count, where we've been denied the opportunity to learn to read and write and to be literate. So you're telling me that one of the organs that I've had to use to catalog my history is technically not considered to be as accurate as a paper document that I could neither read nor write or comprehend. in order for me to be considered valid or certified. That's not saying that I think certification is a bad thing, but the whole framework around what the exhaustive search means and what qualifies as exhaustive search really needs to be reconsidered and made more diverse and inclusive of populations that are not just Anglo-Saxon people who have had access to education and were not denied the opportunity to be able to document themselves in a way like we're able to do right now. That's all I have to
And
say
I
about
don't
that.
know it. And I'm going to ask you a question, or the panel. Do you think that exhaustive search has a color on it? I didn't take it that way. You know what I mean?
It's not so much that it has a
Help me on that.
color.
Oh, okay.
It's more along the lines of what is considered valid under that exhaustive search.
I
right?
got it. I got it.
You know, to me, it's like that meme that's on social media where it says, you know, white folks stole me from Africa, and then now I have to pay $100 to find out where I'm from. I have to pay them to find out where I'm from, right? It's the same thing. Exhaustive search, right, is supposed to be based on documents that I could not create or ensure their creation because I was not literate and I was denied the opportunity to do so.
I got it.
That's all I'm saying. So I'm just gonna put that out there for the folks that that are interested in that. We're not discouraging you from certification, but realize the structures under which you are applying for these things. And when you become the face of these organizations, whether you're in a photo or because of elections or whatever, what you could potentially be perpetuating. That's all I have to say, because that could work two different ways, right? The same organization that we just mentioned earlier that would not admit people of color has now merged with another organization, and they're going under that organization's name that would not admit that member. We're not talking hyperbole. These are actual things that have happened.
Yeah.
And some things continue to happen.
Yes.
And so again, as people getting started, be aware, number one, you need to know what you don't have.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to really explain that. But when you're doing the research, those questions that come up, that just like if Nika and I had a conversation right now, and every time she tells me something, I'm going to come back with a question. And so I think in beginning genealogy, you need to learn the art of asking questions, because it's the what is unknown that you don't know that you need to find out in order to learn about your family. Go back to the funeral program. What was that, 19 something to 2019? That's a lot of years. That's a lot of years.
Well, something that I'll bring up, because Bernice, the aunties will get me if I don't. She says to remind people to look at the non-population census schedules, which here you go. I'm reminding people to look at the agricultural schedules, the slave schedules. Remember, we talked about that. That's limited, right? Mortality schedules, dependent, defective, the DDD, right? When people suffer from mental illness or were just sickly, right? Those are also there as well.
1935 special census.
Special census. Look all these things up. Look at the instructions, right? You have homework, instructions for a census, and also Walter Plecker. You need to be well aware of who he is before we hit these episodes going into the Family History Month series. There's one of our viewers says, I had trouble at the Georgia Archives too. My ancestors were in the Smith family papers, and they told me I couldn't make copies of the slave list.
Why?
Well,
hold on. I emailed the family who donated the papers, and he said he didn't know why they didn't allow me to make copies. And here's the thing, some of that has to do with copyright restrictions.
Right.
And depending on how stringent the archive or repository is with copies, right? This past week, I went and looked at letters that were almost 200 years old. I could make as many copies, pictures, as much as I wanted to, but there was a typewritten transcription of those letters that I can have a copy of. I just can't publish it because it still falls under copyright law. With those things, this is separate, right? So it just may be their policy that they don't, it may be subjective to that. But I'd advocate in other ways. Dante Eubanks is preaching a word in the chat room. I will just have everybody know. he says family historians are certified by the trust placed in them by the elders, generations of cousins, and community who has entrusted us voice and
Well,
preserve our ancestor story. Go ahead, Dante. He said, who can certify me to tell my own story?
Exactly.
Really?
Go, Dante.
Dante in here snatching all the edges. So yeah, we've placed a ton of links in the chat room. And you know, here it is. This is a journey, right? This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. You're not going to get to everything quickly, especially even if you have DNA. Sometimes that's going to complicate things. And so, you know, you have a million episodes and other things yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. It is Ellen. Ellen has a whole blog post about roots and the whole effort made to question the research.
Yes.
Who was questioning it? Why? How
Yes.
a name has been made off of that is still a mainstay within our community. Right?
Yes.
Lots of things. No shade, just telling the truth. I mean,
But when we
what?
talk about certification and stuff, one thing I do want people to do is to cite a reference of where they got the stuff from. So that's one thing I would drive in. Just make sure you document. You don't have to do no special formula or writing it APA or whatever that someone started, whatever. Just document where you got it. Make sure you get the page number down, the place, the repository, wherever you got it from, and the date. Put your date down. We do this also for our family. So if somebody comes behind me, I need them to find that document. So please cite your sources.
Yes,
Definitely.
go back, be able to make it to where you can go
Yeah.
back and before we wrap up, are there any things that you guys wish that you had done earlier, probably around the area of organization? I know a lot of us participated in the genealogy do-over that Thomas McKenty has, you know, where you just start your database over, everything over, you know, because you had any pitfalls. Are there any lasting advice besides the citations? I think that's great. That's something that I didn't start out doing. Now I'm very maniacal about it now.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys would suggest to folks?
But just remember too that the census is not completely comprehensive. There were people that were not on there. So like, don't think just because they're not on there that they're not there either. I mean, just keep going back and forth and cross-referencing to see what you can flesh out.
And not everything is accurate on
That's
the
right.
census.
Right.
Yeah. I always tell people 1910 looks like toilet paper where my ancestors were from. I mean, literally looks like somebody used it and threw it in the garbage. I mean, just horrible.
Wow.
In 1940, my father, my aunt, both my grandparents, my grandmother's sister, and her 6 kids and her husband, they are all missing on 1940. So
and some people just refuse to go to a block. They just refuse to go do the do the work.
Some people did, but there are estimates that I think it's more than 1 million African Americans aren't on that census. So don't think because Wilma Rudolph was one of them. I remember that because her picture was prominent on the newspaper article about how the estimates were that 1 million African Americans were left off because she was not on there.
Undercounted,
undervalued.
Yes. Marginalized.
Yes. So we're going to go to viewer comments right now. Mikey Murata, thanks for joining us. This is, I think, your first episode that I've seen you in. So thanks for joining. Don't forget your own birth certificate. It might hold some information you never knew. I think that's very important. Ironically, I was with cousins last weekend where the mother of the child refused to state her race on the birth certificate, and it said refused, and the father refused as well. That was in the state of California, believe it or not. Wow. Sharon Bruno said, I like to start with the older folks because I was afraid they may pass away. So that's her strategy. Monique Tate says, I started online by taking a DNA test. I've always loved listening to family stories. I found family members I didn't realize were in my family. Janice Lovelace says, your file, meaning Shelley, reminds me of old medical records before everything was electronic. All right. So we have Ask Mariah tonight. This is your favorite part of the show where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more. To the panel, we weigh in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genia buds get past their brick walls. Tonight's Ask Mariah is from Donna Gary. The question she has is, I need to know how I can find my father's name without the cooperation of his family.
Ooh.
Yeah, they are refusing to help me, even though DNA testing has been done. So it seems like she is confirmed that this guy is indeed DePaul, but his family is not. Yeah, she
And
can't.
why? Think
That's
about
the
that.
question. Yeah, that's the
Why?
question. Hold on, let me get through everything. What she knows, she has a marriage, birth, death, and immigration documents. So immigration is involved in this one, you guys. She's done 23andMe and Ancestry DNA, and she says, for her hope for this, my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will know their truth and hopefully medical implications of that truth. So Shelley, I think you raised some important points, right? She's done DNA. Her father's family shows up as DNA matches, but they're refusing to help her, even tell her his name. What do you think she should do? She's already gathered documents.
I would think that he might not be daddy. That would have to be on the table as well. Who's there?
No, not when you've done DNA testing and his family members show up.
Could be a brother. Unless she's got all what y'all do with that DNA. Because why would they be hiding it if she's got DNA? Maybe it's like the Thomas Jefferson, and they're saying, oh, it was his brother or the overseer of Sally Hemings. I'm just saying they're hiding something by not sharing it.
Willie?
Because I have a similar situation like that with my grandmother. She was an outside child, so maybe it could be a product of an affair, and the kids maybe don't want her involved in the family, maybe.
Maybe they're waiting for her to drop dead so they could reach out to you. And that's the other thing. People are always concerned about cash.
Right.
That mean green.
Inheritance or something, yeah.
Right.
And thinking that you're coming for money. That's always folks' concern. Even no matter how pure at heart you are with your intentions on why you are reaching out to them, people always will bring it back to money. Always.
My first episode of BlackProGen Live was our DNA episode.
Oh yeah.
And I had received my DNA results maybe 5 months prior, and I had no idea what was going on. I was raised with public announcement. Finally, I was raised with my grandfather, who I thought was my grandfather. Turns out he was not my grandfather biologically. My grandfather is a first cousin of Tina Knowles. Okay, so my people that I was reaching out to were Beyonce and Solange's people. So they automatically thought, you're not our people. We don't know you. Right. You want something. You're trying to get connected to us. So it didn't, like there's oftentimes people just want to keep their status quo of what their family is. Since that time, I found I've DNA tested 4 siblings that we've confirmed were my own siblings. And I'm 24, y'all. So if you think about it, if someone is, say, in their elderly years, they may not just want to shake those things up. To this day, my grandmother still doesn't know that I know all of this information. So sometimes you just don't want to stir the pot. That could be a reason.
Very valid.
Does she, here's the question. This is a matter of policy. Does she work around these folks? Would you work around the people?
Yes.
I think most of us would work around them. And I think for her, she's already gone and she's done the research. She's gathered the documents, right? The DNA is supporting what her documents say based on how this reads. This is one of those scenarios I often tell people, not everything is going to end up like it does on TV, you guys, right? Where we have this big, happy family. They're all hugging and embracing and sharing photos. And not every scenario like this ends up the exact same way. Some people, like we said, they may have their reasons for why they choose to be involved and why they don't, or why they disclose and why they don't. And so those are just things when you're on the outside that you are forced to have to accept when you're not within the realm of what they have considered family up until this point. And so I think there's a little bit of soul searching that you may have to do in terms of what you feel comfortable with moving forward. If his family continues to pump the brakes on you, don't push further, right? This information may be new to them. They may question it, right? People question you seeing them in their DNA results, and the DNA results were compared by a third party. So what would make, you know what I mean? Why should they just all of a sudden stop questioning? Because you're saying this and they're thinking, well, I just got percentages for this test. They're not realizing there's a whole separate aspect of the site where the DNA matches. I mean, come on now. And you can try to find family, friends, other folks. But here's the other question I have. Who on your end knows who your father is and is not telling you?
Right. Where's mama?
Yeah.
Where's your mom, her sister, her best friend? It could be a number of different things. Yeah.
Somebody in that neighborhood knows the truth. And it don't have to be his family.
Yeah. Any other parting words before we move into current events? Because we have a big doozy to share tonight on that. All right. Let me go back a slide. Okay, let's share our screen. All right, so do you need help with the brick wall? Reach out to BlackProGen Live with your query today. A link to submit is in the description of each and every episode of the show. Remember to be super specific. Let us know what records you've searched, what oral history you have, if you've DNA tested, and more. The more you tell us, the better. You just may be selected to be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Big, huge news tonight that everyone needs to be aware of. True will be posting the links to these things that I'm talking about in the chat room, released today through a press release by the Department of Justice, interim policy emerging on emerging method to generate leads for unsolved violent crimes. Well, to make English out of that, this is their policy, their interim policy on how they're going to start using genetic genealogy.
That's all it is.
Let me repeat that. This is the Department of Justice's, and it should be DOJ instead of FBI, but shoot, they're all the same thing nowadays. Let's be honest. This is their interim policy that they have announced today, press release. True will be posting it inside of the chat so you guys can read it at your leisure. I highly suggest that you read this. Highly suggest. What are the most important points? Forensic genetic genealogy requires a type of DNA testing that the department laboratories currently do not perform. So the sample must be outsourced to a vendor laboratory. This means that if they gather DNA from a crime scene and they've had it tested and it's already in the court system, if they decide to go the route of forensic genealogy, for forensic genetic genealogy, it has to be retested through a vendor laboratory. Does not say who that is, okay? After the vendor laboratory completes a more comprehensive analysis on the sample, the resulting genetic profile is entered into one or more publicly available genetic genealogy services. Read that GEDmatch, family tree DNA at this point, and compared by automation against the genetic profiles of individuals who have voluntarily submitted their own samples. The computer's algorithm then evaluates potential familial relationships between the sample donor and the website's users. If an association is detected, it generates a lead. Subsequently, law enforcement can use that lead to advance their investigation using traditional investigative and genealogical methods. A suspect shall not be arrested based solely on genetic association generated by a genetic genealogy service. If a suspect is identified after a genetic association has occurred, the typing, remember they said they had one type of testing, they have to outsource to do the other type of testing, which is STR testing. STR DNA typing must be performed, and the suspect's STR DNA profile must be directly compared to the forensic profile previously uploaded to CODIS. So this means that they have to have already extracted the DNA from the crime scene. That information is submitted to CODIS. There's no match. Then they have to go through a process of getting this vetted through an attorney general or a lawyer to involve forensic genealogy, right? Gather another sample or retest the previous one, and then compare that, upload it back to CODIS to see if there's a match. That has to happen first, okay? Moving forward, and this is the point that I think everybody should be aware of. There's a question in the chat room. Do you know which company is going to do it for them? I have no idea who's going to serve as the outsource. I just know that they provided me with this information, and there is no way I could host this show and not tell you guys about it. I would be remiss if I did so. The part of this that bothers me and that I'm calling out to you guys right now, if you don't pay attention to anything that I say for the whole show, you need to pay attention to this. The term violent crime means any homicide or sex crime involving a homicide investigation during which forensic genetic genealogy service is used in an attempt to identify the remains of a suspected homicide victim. So this works both ways. It can identify the perpetrator or it can identify a victim. What we've seen in our circle is that it's been more about identifying the perpetrator and less about the victim, and that the victim looks a certain way. Have we seen any brown girls' crimes solved? I have not. That's not saying they're not in the process of doing them, but I just want to put that out there, okay? Here's the other piece. It also includes other serious crimes and criminal offenses designated by a genetic genealogy service for which investigative use of its service by law enforcement has been authorized by the service. What does this mean? Loosely, right? We're saying that this means GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, or whoever provides law enforcement access can determine what they consider as a violent crime, you guys.
Wow.
And that the Justice Department and et al. Is well within their rights to search for people connected to things if it falls under the purview of the terms of service. Now, I'm going to come off of screen share because I want to make sure you guys are aware of what I'm talking about. With GEDmatch, they changed the terms of service and did not alert their users. They just did it on a whim on a phone call. So when you are willingly placing your information on these systems, you all, i.e. GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, you cannot act ignorant about what they've provided in terms of access. Please, 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 please read through the press release. We put the link in the chat, and read through the policy so that you know what you are participating in, you guys. GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA can decide what a violent crime is.
Have to be proactively involved and know these things. You know, we have to know what they're doing. We have to be aware. We can't just be naive about this anymore. And we know that this hurts our community the most.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a question for you guys. So on GEDmatch, and you opt out, and it clearly shows you opt out. They can't do anything according to what they're saying, that they can't give the information to law enforcement without your permission. How is this twisting that? Or is there another line that I missed? And I'm saying that for the folks that still have their stuff on GEDmatch.
Well, the problem is that, especially in terms of GEDmatch, they turn on a dime whenever they feel like it.
Well,
right?
that's number one.
Your rights and the what they agree to in the terms of service for them is highly changeable at any moment. That's what the track record has proven, right?
Right.
Because it was, you can't log in unless you agree to these new terms of service, which include law enforcement access. Then they turned on a dime and said, well, no, we're going to opt everybody out. Then they decided, okay, we're going to label police kits, right? And then we get this email, 2 weeks ago, that is encouraging people to opt into law enforcement access when the company is supposed to be an impartial third party. So I don't know. Y'all should know. I was a GEDmatch proponent. I was telling people to upload it. It was an tool. But what we are suffering from in the genealogy community with regard to DNA is people abusing the benevolent nature of how genealogy operates for profit. That's not saying we don't want killers to be caught and rapists to be off the street. That's not what we're saying. But we have the ability, and it's our right to protect our data. Now, something else that's loosely related to this, if you have an open public family tree, right? It didn't dawn on me until I started reading through this policy. These trees are subject to the same abuse of benevolence,
Correct.
Oh.
right?
Yes.
Think about it.
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent. I think people should have open trees. I think I've used them for DNA. That's how people find out how they're connected to me and several other kits that I administer. But let's say they hit a brick wall on GEDmatch, they find no matches, but then there's a potential suspect. And here you have this open tree with 3,000 people on it. I'm just saying, you guys, be mindful of all of this, because our industry and our space has been co-opted.
Mhm.
And some people do not have pure intentions on what they're doing. That's all I'm saying. Please do yourself a favor. Do yourself a favor.
Do people know that even if they have a private tree on Ancestry, they still get their hints and everything?
Well, no, trees can be private, non-searchable. Meaning that
yes, you're
make
right.
them private and people can't search
Okay.
them. So you can, that's still an option. Okay.
Yeah.
But I like I said, that's the thing. If you want a bait tree, you can put a bait tree out there, but know what you're doing by putting the bait tree out there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as you test, but then you represent and you stand proxy for the rest of your family. And as I said before, I'm not advocating for violent criminals to stay on the street. I'm advocating for my privacy and my right for my family's space, not and peace, to be invaded because someone is predicted to be a criminal or a perpetrator.
You know, it hits the heart being a mama of a black son.
Come on now.
So, yeah, it just draws all kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, so I just want folks to realize, here's the thing. If you have a tree on Family Search, there is no way to lock your tree down.
No, I don't have one there. Yeah.
I'm just telling people, there is no way to lock your tree down on Family Search. On Ancestry, you have options. It can be open, it can be private and searchable, meaning that if someone searches for certain terms, they can, still see that there's a tree out there. And then you have private, non-searchable. You determine what you feel comfortable with. But we would be totally irresponsible if we did not share this information with you all and get it out to you for you to distill it and figure out what you want to do with it. Okay, just want to make sure you guys know I'm very serious about this. All right, moving forward, largely on his own, John Robinson did the maintenance work at Memorial Park Cemetery, an African-American burial ground that his family has owned since 1929. It's no small task. The 20-acre cemetery at 2225 East Dr. MLK Jr. Boulevard is a final resting place for 6,000 people and home to a memorial erected to honor Black soldiers killed in World War I. The job got away from Robinson. Paper records kept through the years don't indicate how many plots are still available there. There isn't even an inventory of the burials. Robinson died July 15th of this year at 66. No one in his family has an interest in taking over the cemetery. At this point, neither does anyone else. Memorial Park Cemetery was established in 1919 as Tampa's second African-American burial ground, around the same time that the first one, Zion Cemetery on North Florida Avenue, was accepting burials. Soon after, Zion Cemetery began fading from public view. Grave markers vanished and businesses and apartments were later built on top of it. This is the story that we shared previously on the show about how public housing development was built on top of an African-American cemetery. For the much larger Memorial Park Cemetery, there's a disagreement between Robinson's estate and the city of Tampa over whether the estate has the money to continue operating the cemetery. Even though no one wants to maintain and people think there is no money, Ashley Bauman, city spokesman, disagrees. State law allows the city to maintain and secure an abandoned cemetery or one that has not been maintained for more than 6 months. A city or county may sue to recover maintenance costs according to the law. Something to keep in mind when you are talking about cemeteries. Something else, Google Earth. For 2 decades, William Moult's family was left with unanswered questions about his disappearance. Now they have closure, all because of a startling discovery made on Google Earth. Moult, who was 40 at the time, seemingly vanished from Palm Beach, Florida. What is going on with Florida and Florida man right now? That evening, his girlfriend, that evening, his looks like he called his girlfriend from a bar to tell her that he would be home soon. Shortly afterward, he was seen leaving the bar alone, getting in his car. He reportedly did not appear intoxicated, according to WPTV. 22 years ago was the last time anyone would see him alive. Recently, a previous resident of the neighborhood in Wellington, Florida, was looking at the neighborhood on Google Earth when they noticed something in the water, according to Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. In the images, you can see what appears to be a car in a retention pond that is flanked by homes from Google Earth. The object spotted turned out to be a vehicle that was heavily calcified, and after removing it from the pond, police discovered skeletal remains inside. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for processing on Tuesday, and they were positively identified as molt.
Wow.
All right, last one. A Maryland commission empowered to investigate at least 40 lynchings that occurred between 1854 and 1933 will have its public launch. The Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission is the first ever state-run commission dedicated to addressing lynchings in the U.S. I always say stuff has to start on the coast before it goes to the middle of the country. The commission was established by a bill that gained unanimous approval from the House and Senate in April, acknowledging 40 African Americans were lynched by white mobs over an 80-year period in Maryland. Cheryl Ifield, president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which you should be following her on Twitter. If you're not, I highly suggest that, says we are losing the last physical eyewitnesses to some of these events, but it's not too late. The bill also recognizes that no one was ever charged in connection to these crimes, and various government entities commissioned the lynchings and conspired to conceal the identities of the perpetrator. Come on now. Lynchings have been recorded in 18 of Maryland's 24 counties. Wow. The last occurred 86 years ago, but the truth behind the killing is hidden in plain sight. The commission will be comprised of a staff member from the state attorney general's office who is authorized to issue subpoenas for documents and witnesses that could reveal key details like the burial place of victims, who she says were often buried in obscure graveyards. Wow. Lots of interesting news tonight. Well, we are closing out September, and we've got a meaty October in store for you on BlackProGen Live. October is Family History Month, and we've got weekly shows just to keep you busy this year. Leading off is episode 94, Back Home, Travel to Our Mother Countries, with special guest Ada Anago Brown on Tuesday, October 8th. Visiting our ancestral locations is a deeply transformative experience. In this episode, learning ins and outs of planning a trip, what to expect, and how to incorporate the experience into your genealogy project. Next is episode 895, Birthright. Who has the right to tell my people stories? We sort of talked about this tonight. Should there be a stipulation on who has the right to tell certain stories? Is it dependent on the role certain groups play within the historical event landscape? Episode 95 will tackle this difficult topic on Tuesday, October 15th. Can't read the writing on a crucial document? Think you're seeing one thing on something you've collected, but you're not sure? Send your handwriting conundrums to BPG and we'll help you with them live during Ask MARIAH, the handwriting edition. That's airing live on Tuesday, October 22nd. To round out the month, we'll end with episode 97, In the Act, Genealogy and History in Popular Culture. Genealogy and history are in vogue in popular culture right now, largely due to the number of television programs that are themed around the topics. In episode 97, we'll discuss the implications of the two converging into entertainment and the effects they have on the industry as a whole. Join us on Tuesday, October 29th for that episode. Have you checked out all the subjects we'll be covering during season 5? Guess what? There are only 7 episodes left. That's it. Be sure to head to whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule, and don't forget to set your reminders. Also, here is your reminder to tune into the long-running archive of the Research at the National Archives and Beyond, hosted by BlackProGen Life panelist Bernice Bennett. Visit Blog Talk Radio/Bernice Bennett for more. Also, check out the African Roots podcast hosted by BlackProGen Life panelist Angela Walton Raji. Visit AfricanRootsPodcast.com for more. Anything else the panel would like to leave us with before we conclude tonight's episode?
Stick to the basics.
Yeah.
We talked about them all night. Stick to the basics on your research.
Can't
There's no
go wrong with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Stick to the basics. Stick to all the basics. All right. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for joining us this evening. Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, Shelley Murphy, True Lewis, Willie Russell IV, Alex Traps-Chabala, and Renata Yarborough-Sanders. We want to thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Be sure you got homework. Remember, we're expecting for you to report back on it. You need to read the instructions for a census, and you need to check out who Walter Plecker is. All right. Have a good evening, everybody. We shall see you next week for Back Home, going and visiting our mother countries.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen
Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint.
The place where evidence tells the stories.